This Binarapoya Day, we feature Dr. James R. Doty, a professor of neurosurgery at Stanford University, United States of America. He is also the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism, Research and Education, a part of the Stanford Institute. Born in January 1955, Dr. James Doty is today an American neurosurgeon, inventor, entrepreneur, and philanthropist. He who grew up in poverty worked relentlessly to become what he is today. He also supports a number of charitable organizations on peace and healthcare. Dr. James Doty's life story is illustrative of what it means to lead a truly compassionate and selfless life. He was in Sri Lanka attending the Metta Conference 2014, organized by the Bandaragama Sarvodaya Center together with the Aloka Foundation. And today, he recaptures his life story exclusively on Art Television.
Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be with you. I am extraordinarily blessed, and for each of us, often what we do as adults is a manifestation of what we have been through as children or what we have learned as we've grown up. And I grew up in poverty. My family was on public assistance essentially my entire life. We were evicted many times from our home because we were not able to pay the rent. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was an invalid. She was paralyzed and had a seizure disorder and was chronically depressed, attempted suicide many times. And as you can imagine from that situation, it was a very chaotic family life. And it was one in which you never knew what was going to happen. And you know, when you have uncertainty, it creates anxiety. I used to tell people that it was like being a leaf being blown by an ill wind. You never knew where you were going to land or what was going to happen. And while I'm not saying that I was physically abused or certainly sexually abused, but that type of an environment is certainly not an ideal one. And I, in fourth grade, had met a doctor who came to speak to my class. And I was so impressed with him, his kindness, his generosity, who he was, that I decided to be a doctor. But the reality was, for my situation, the likelihood of that occurring was quite low. And as I got older and became a teenager, I was getting actually quite depressed in some ways because I felt my aspirations were not possible, and that maybe I should just give up. And what happened was that when I was 13, I actually walked into a magic shop. And I didn't even know this magic shop existed. I was actually riding my bicycle quite a ways from where I lived. Went into this magic shop because magic had always intrigued me. And it was lunchtime and the owner was not there, but his mother was there. And she was sitting there eating lunch, and we began talking, and she knew nothing about anything in the magic shop. She was just visiting her son for the summer and happened to be there. And we talked, and after about 20 or 30 minutes, she said to me, you know, I really like you, and I think I could teach you something that could change your life. Now, I wish I could tell you I had some wonderful insight and had this, this feeling that, oh my goodness, this is incredible. But frankly, I had nothing better to do, and she was being nice to me. And she said, I'm going to be here for another 6 weeks. And if you show up every day, I'll teach you something. So I showed up, and what happened was that over that period of time, she actually taught me a meditation practice, a mindfulness practice, a visualization technique that was combined with the power of positive thinking and some aspects of self-hypnosis, but it was extraordinarily powerful. And it took me from this perception of having limited to no possibilities to actually having unlimited possibilities. And it was really my very first experience with, if you will, one's power to change their brain. And as a result of that, it made me understand that my limitations were self-created. My perception that either I wasn't worthy or that I shouldn't try were self-created. And it empowered me to look at the world a completely different way. It allowed me to set a goal and inculcate that goal into my being and have it manifest itself. Now, interestingly enough, what I learned though was that while that may be true, it's not necessarily always a straight line that gets you to the goal. But that being said, it manifested itself in a couple ways, and let me give you some examples. I had no clue how to even apply to college. I didn't have any mentors, and frankly, my school counselor, even though I was a fairly good student, had written me off. And so the way I ended up applying to college was I was in a science class and there was a girl next to me, and she was filling out an application. And I said to her, you know, what are you doing? And she said, well, I'm applying to college and the deadline is Friday, and this was a Tuesday. And I said, really? I said, where are you going? And she said, UC Irvine. And then she looked at me and she said, where are you going? And I said, well, that's where I'm going too. And so she said, oh, well, you know, if you don't have an application, I have an extra one. She gave that to me. I filled it out. It was the only college I applied to, and it was the only college I was accepted to. And that was my story of getting into college. Now, I started college, and it was actually quite overwhelming. I had to have a job. I did get some scholarships, because once I had this belief, everything improved as far as grades and everything, but it wasn't enough to pay for everything. And so I worked a fair amount. And periodically I would have to leave the university to take care of family situations. You know, my father was in jail. I had to bail him out of jail. My mother attempted suicide. I had to go to the hospital. And so as a result, within less than a year, I basically flunked out of the university. And in fact, I was asked to leave because my GPA was so bad. And I actually just refused to. So I kept working, and over a period of time, once I got more familiarity and was able to adjust, I did fine. But what happened was, when it came to apply to med school, my GPA, and in the US system, it's a 4.0 with straight A's. The average GPA for acceptance to medical school at that time was 3.79. My GPA was 2.53. So at my university, we had a pre-med committee that you would have to actually go in front of, and then they would decide if they were going to give you a recommendation, and it was comprised of professors at the university. So actually, I went to apply, and so I went to register for my appointment, and I was told that they would not give me an appointment, and that because it was a waste of everyone's time. Low GPA. And it was interesting because the head of the School of Biological Sciences himself turned up with two other professors. And imagine what it's like for a 19 or 20-year-old who's fairly naive to sit before three esteemed professors who are sitting in front of you like this, essentially by their body language, also reinforcing the view that this is a waste of their time. And first of all, this is insulting to the dignity of an individual. What I did was, and I know it may seem strange, and I'm not quite sure where this came from, but I began lecturing them, which ended up being almost an hour, on who gave them the right to destroy people's dreams. And to demonstrate to me any objective evidence that beyond a certain level of intelligence, that it has absolutely any correlation with being a good physician. And in fact, I could quote them a number of straight A students who are the most horrible physicians I would not send my dog to. And at the end of our one-sided discussion, they were actually all crying.
They were crying?
Yes. And the reason is what happened. We translated a situation where they were objectifying me into a grade or a test score and not seeing me as a human being. And this is the problem. People are people. They are not numbers. And you cannot judge someone's potential. You cannot judge their persistence. You cannot judge their drive if you know nothing about the circumstances that created who they are. And so they ended up actually giving me the highest letter of recommendation that was possible. Now, the other interesting synchronicity or synchronous event, as Jungian would say, Jung would say, was that as I was leaving, there was a brochure on this bulletin board, and it advertised a program at Tulane University for students who were from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds or minority students. And I said, oh, this is incredible. This is exactly something that would be beneficial to me and help me, and it's set up for kids like me. Well, the deadline had passed for applying. So I called the woman who headed it and convinced her to let me in, and she let me in. And I went there for the summer. It had a profound effect. I applied to one med school, that was Tulane, and that was the only med school that accepted me. And in fact, they actually ended up accepting me, and I did not get my degree. So it's extraordinary that they would accept somebody with a GPA such as mine and without a degree, but they did. And I did perfectly fine in medical school. Now, the other interesting part of that story is that, as you know, or what we may talk about a little bit later, is I ended up being a successful entrepreneur. So after Hurricane Katrina, which had a dramatic effect on the city of New Orleans, where Tulane is, they evacuated the medical school. They moved the students to Texas, actually, to Baylor. The library was damaged. The dean became depressed and actually resigned. And so they were trying to recruit a new dean, and he wanted an endowed chair. So to make a long story short, I ended up endowing his chair, refurbishing the library, and setting up a large scholarship in this woman's name who let me into the program, which is for socioeconomically disadvantaged students who are going into service for others. And I'm one of, if not the largest donor to the medical school. And so the dean of the medical school is the Doty professor. So what this shows you is that you can never predict, you can never estimate what the future holds for anyone. I was extraordinarily blessed by being a successful entrepreneur, and I was able to thank the people who had helped me on my journey in a real way that had a profound effect on the organization, the medical school. I'm also now on the board of governors. So. Well, I think I'll comment on all three. The last one, which is luck, I believe luck is a recognition of opportunity and acting on it. Many people are presented with opportunities, but for many people, they are risk aversive. And when you take risks, when you respond to situations of which the outcome is unknown, for many people that's scary and terrifying, and they don't want to be in that position because it's too uncomfortable. But the reality is, if you have nothing to lose, it doesn't matter. And I have repeatedly found that by being fearless, by putting yourself out there, understanding that there is the risk of failure, actually oftentimes results in success, but it also strengthens your understanding that by putting yourself out there, it actually opens up immense opportunities to one. The other, this issue or question or comment about persistence, or there's a popular term now that's being used called grit, which is not giving up, not listening to people tell you something is not possible, and going back repeatedly, oftentimes even in the face of repeated failure. And I think that is absolutely correct. You know, there's been some studies done about salesmen, and I can't remember the exact statistics, but it's something along the lines of if they go to a client between 1 and 3 times and they stop after that, it's something like a 90% failure rate. If they get to 5 to 7 times, it's maybe 60% that they'll have success in selling something. And it's only until the 9th where, you know, they end up selling almost the majority of the people, because they have demonstrated this persistence and belief to the point where either the person realizes they are really an advocate and believer, or they're so tired of being bothered that they just give it to them. But whatever the case, it's successful. The other aspect is this attitude of gratitude. It is fascinating for me to watch people who sit there and say, I did this, I did this, it's all about me. And in fact, we see this in Silicon Valley. We'll see a person in their 20s who, by luck or opportunity, have been extraordinarily successful in the creation of a company. Now, I will say to you, it may or may not have real value, but regardless, they have suddenly become worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And it is extraordinary to see what happens, because they don't sit there and demonstrate gratitude. They sit there and say, I have been anointed because I am so smart and I'm so brilliant and I did this all on my own and I deserve this and I am special. And not only do I now know about my own area, but I know about every area, and I should have a platform to make commentary. And I cannot tell you the number of conferences or meetings where I see a 20-some-year-old sit on a platform or a dais and pontificate about stuff of which he knows nothing about. Because there's a difference between having wisdom and experience and being successful, perhaps even by accident. So I would say it is very seldom that you see someone that young who appreciates the fact that none of us accomplish anything without the support of others. And in fact, what I tell people is I can always tell a good doctor. A good doctor is one, as he walks down the hallway, he knows the name of the person sweeping the floor, acknowledges them and thanks them. He knows the name of the person who is changing the bed linen. He is respectful of the nurses, because without those people, he cannot be a success in his job. So I interviewed this person to take over, and we walked through the hospital. And as I entered the hospital, the person at the information desk came over and gave me a hug, and I'd operated on her husband. And then we went to the cafeteria, and 2 of the cafeteria people came out and said hello and brought me a latte and said how much they were going to miss me. Then we went to radiology, and one of the technicians thanked me for a gift that she had delivered a child, and thanked me for the gift that I had given her. And then we go to the ICU, and the nurses are saying, oh, we're going to so miss Dr. Doty. He's so wonderful. We just love him here, right? So this goes all the way through the hospital, and I must have gotten probably 20 or 30 hugs, right? And at the end of it, he looks at me and he goes, what's wrong with those people? And I go, what are you talking about? He says, what is all this hugging and stuff? I said, well, you know, I have found in my own life that if you recognize the dignity of every person, you respect them, you're kind to them, you acknowledge them, that they really want to work with you and do things for you, and it makes my life much easier. I said, how do you function? And he said, well, I'm the boss, I tell them what to do, and if they don't do it, I fire them. And I said, well, obviously that's not working very well for you because you're here. And, you know, I didn't give him the job, but